It's like I'm playing T-ball. These guys are making it way too easy for me. Who would have guessed the enshittification of your major franchises would have a negative impact on your future? The games industry is about to lose everything, and these guys have no clue why. They're sitting around scratching their heads, watching it all burn down, seeing more studio closures, more layoffs. They're blaming it on market trends, on financial indicators, on aggressive competition. I mean, they're right on the competition part, but they're not laying any of the blame at their own feet. They're taking no responsibility for their choices or for their own games. Bobby Kotick, everybody's favorite former gaming CEO, is now tied up in a legal battle, and he just confirmed a 60% decline in post-acquisition Activision. This guy goes out and he says that the investors should be thanking him for having the foresight to see the decline in the company that he was running, understanding market headwinds, and also having the knowledge that the games industry was eventually and inevitably going to get smaller. This dude literally sold Microsoft a Trojan horse and is just sitting back like, damn, man, that's tough. The games industry is about to eat its just desserts. This is the bed that these guys have made for themselves. If you take the time to think about it, every single one of these companies is built around a couple of key franchises, and that's really all that they have anymore. And that's Activision, that's EA, that's Ubisoft, that's Capcom. That's almost every single company that's out there. These guys have been chasing each other's tails for so long, and now these games are failing. They're failing alongside them, and these guys have no way out. So today, I'm going to talk about why that is. But before that, a word from today's sponsor, my cat. Actually, it's Starforge. Today's video is sponsored by Starforge Systems, and honestly, the timing matters right now. PC parts are surging, availability keeps getting worse, and for a lot of people, building piece by piece just isn't an option anymore. If you guys have been thinking about upgrading, this is one of those moments where waiting is actively going to cost you more money. Starforge builds high-quality white-glove PCs across the board, from full-tower powerhouses to clean mid-range systems and compact form-factor builds. Their custom cases and collaborative designs are some of the slickest ones that are out there, with tons of options depending on what you want your setup to look like, not just how it performs. Everything is assembled with real attention to detail by people that genuinely know what they are doing. That's what you want in this industry. If you guys want a PC that is built right while looking good, this is your opportunity. Check out Starforge Systems using the link in the description. You guys have heard this line for years, players are the problem. We're this overly needy, whiny audience that's glued to our favorite franchises, constantly complaining, not because anything is actually wrong with the game, but because we're just impossible to please. And you know what? I'll give them this. There's some truth to that. There's always that crowd that just can't pull themselves away from a single game. Their entire taste profile is about as deep as a puddle, but that's not most players, and that's definitely not most criticism. More often than not, those complaints for a lot of these long-running franchises are painfully consistent. It's performance, identity, direction, the same things year after year, and publishers either just ignore it outright, convincing themselves that the players just don't know what they're talking about. They'll pretend that every single change that they make is actually secretly brilliant because it's helping their bottom line, or worse off, they just don't care at all because the money keeps coming and they think that it always will, and have things changed? That money has finally slowed. The cracks started to spread, and the disaster they swore would never happen is now unfolding in slow motion, long enough for the players to enjoy being right, and also long enough for these companies to feel every single mistake they refuse to own. One of the clearest warning signs that we've had recently is the outright failure of Call of Duty. Player numbers have been sliding for years, interest in the franchise has steadily started to dry up online, and with the release of Black Ops 7, we've hit what is easily the lowest point in the franchise's history. Now, I ran the numbers back when Black Ops 7 first launched. Black Ops 6 opened up to around 315,000 concurrent players on Steam. Black Ops 7 barely cracked 100,000 players. That's nearly a 70% decline right out of the gate. Stack that on top of reports from the UK showing a 61% decline in physical sales, and I thought it was obvious. This franchise has roughly lost nearly 60% of its audience in a single year. Now, I gotta take a quick victory lap here because I had a lot of people that were telling me that I was wrong. I had people making videos about me, tweeting about me. Steam isn't everything, they would say. And now I have one of the biggest gaming executives in this industry's history coming out and saying the exact same thing under oath. In an article from IGN titled "Bobby Kotick Claims Activision, Call of Duty, and Consoles Are Doing So Poorly, It Proves He Was Right to Sell Activision Blizzard to Microsoft for $69 billion. Shots fired." First, IGN talks about Bobby Kotick responding to an investor lawsuit that's tied to the Microsoft acquisition of Activision Blizzard. Investors claim that Kotick rushed the sale to launch to protect his own position and cash out hundreds of millions of dollars while also shielding himself from the fallout that's tied to Activision's misconduct scandals. Kotick denies all wrongdoing and argues that the deal was justified. And as part of his response, he goes as far as accusing Embracer Group of secretly benefiting from the lawsuit, a claim that Embracer has flatly denied. I looked into this myself, and honestly, it just goes to show just how garbage the games industry is nowadays. Kotick isn't just defending the lawsuit here. He's claiming that the whole thing is basically a proxy war. He's arguing that Embracer is working the angles behind the scenes, the investor lawsuit, and even the union pressure that was behind the misconduct are all a part of a broader effort to weaken Activision. His proof is that a former executive from Embracer is now working for one of the unions. I guess this is the games industry today, essentially corporate Game of Thrones. This is the red wedding of video game sales, I guess. Less focus on the games and a lot more time spent maneuvering, posturing, lawyering up. This is all just pathetic to me. IGN continues by saying Kotick is using the declining performance of Activision Call of Duty in the console market as a whole as proof that selling the company when he did was the right move. And there's one quote in particular here that's getting a lot of attention right now. Kotick would go on to say, today, given that console sales are at an all-time low and Call of Duty sales are off over 60% from the prior year, plaintiffs should be expressing extreme gratitude for the foresight Activision leadership demonstrated in consummating this transaction. This guy, only this dude would be the one to walk into a court case and casually claim that he had the foresight to see his own flagship franchise collapse alongside the rest of the industry and then present that as some kind of win. He's basically saying that he knowingly sold Xbox a Trojan horse, cashed out before it all fell apart, and now everybody should be thanking him for getting out early. And honestly, I guess from an investor standpoint, he's not wrong. Now, what's frustrating is how this article then immediately tries to cover for Call of Duty. I don't know why these guys still keep doing this. IGN starts hedging for the developers, saying that they don't know where Kotick got these numbers from and that they should be factoring in Game Pass as the explanation for the sales drop, as if we haven't heard this excuse 100,000 times by now. Actually, now that I think about it, that falls apart in the exact same article. Only a few paragraphs later, they point out that Xbox hardware sales are down 70% year over year. If people aren't buying the hardware, then you're not magically gaining subscribers. Those players don't just materialize out of thin air, so where exactly are those new player numbers coming from? I'm going to tell you right now, that's not coming from PC. PC is not the one making up the difference here. We already know what happens when an actually good game launches on both Steam and Game Pass. Steam still posts record sales numbers and player numbers every single time. So no, there's not some hidden success story here. This franchise is losing relevance, and people are scrambling to explain it away instead of just admitting what's actually happening right in front of them. IGN then goes to point out that Kotick didn't just repeat the 60% decline, he doubled down on it. In his response, he outright admits that Activision had been missing their own long-range term targets for years and that the board knew about those targets and knew they were unrealistic when the deal was made. As he puts it, the company has historically missed nearly all of its ambitious targets set forth in its long-range plans, a fact known by the board when the deal was negotiated. Going further to say, all told, had the deal not gone through, this likely would have resulted in a substantially lower stock price, as easily established by Activision's financial performance post-closing, which had been far below the ambitious targets contained in the plans. Now, I hope it isn't controversial for me to say that if you continually miss your long-range targets, maybe your targets might be a little bit too far downrange, maybe your expectations might be a little bit too high. I can't imagine how that could negatively impact the games industry. This means that Activision Blizzard has likely been sliding for years, at least the last 4 years. Kotick saw that, he knew that, and he took advantage of an overvalued moment for the company, and he got out. Not a huge fan of the guy, but it's definitely a gangster move, and I gotta respect it, but this is what executives do. This is what happens when the games don't matter, the product doesn't matter, the players don't matter. The only thing that matters is how good you look from the outside looking in, regardless of what's rotting underneath. And at least from an investor's perspective and from Microsoft's perspective, valuing them at $70 billion, everything looked just great, but it actually wasn't. This also means that their audience never actually grew. Any resurgence that we ever saw for Call of Duty or World of Warcraft or Overwatch, that was just returning players that were coming back, not new ones that were being created. That's how you miss your long-range targets, because you're not stacking new players on top of your existing players. Eventually, when you're just bringing back the same audience, that audience degrades over time because people either phase out of the game or phase out of gaming entirely. They age out of it in some cases, age out of that genre maybe. And that's the reason why their catalog got smaller. That's why their microtransactions went up, because they weren't making nearly enough money and they had to tighten their purse strings to be able to do so. They essentially just kept turning up the dial as players filtered out because it was the only lever that these guys had left. And Kotick is saying that this is a broader market trend. He saw the headwind shifting and he got out. This is the collapse that we're seeing in the games industry right now. Companies that started off strong, they had franchises that meant something, but over time, developers got replaced with bachelor's degrees in business. The players got replaced with shareholders, and the game stopped being about something that you were building, and instead they became something that you were just trying to profit from. Strip it down, sell it off, move on to the next one, repeat over and over and over again. And when you start to think about that pattern, you start to see it across the entire industry. So right now we're watching a shift that's happening across the entire industry. The old guard, the companies used to dominate every conversation, and also our wallets are losing relevance fast, and new leaders are now taking their place. We're moving away from Xbox, Sony, EA, Activision, Ubisoft, and now towards From Software, Larian, Sandfall, Grinding Gear Games, Embark, people like that. And the reason this is happening right now is pretty simple. The way that AAA has been running is completely at odds with how the games industry actually works. Something that we haven't really ever taken the time to talk about on this channel is games fail constantly, way more than they ever succeed. Steam's own revenue distribution shows that out of the tens of thousands of games that we see released every single year, nearly 70% of them make less than $1,000. Around 40% of them don't even recoup the $100 publishing fee just to get listed. Only about 5% of them sell between 10 and 50,000 copies, and only 2% of them, actually just under 2% of them, actually clear 100,000 copies sold. When you get into making games, failure is supposed to be the default assumption. You plan around it, you stick within your means, you expect things not to work out, and then when they don't, your studio will still survive. That's how independent and indie developers think. It's baked into their culture. Now, what's wild is that this is the exact principle that the rest of the industry has seemingly abandoned. They just stopped planning for failure. They stopped respecting risk, and they built companies that only function if everything goes perfectly right every single time. I think this is something that's coming from the beginnings of the games industry. A lot of these companies just got way too big too fast off the back of insanely successful games released back to back. These guys just didn't have to ever sit with failure for very long. They went on legendary runs, but once that success hit, they ended up corporatizing. They brought in a lot of middle management after their companies exploded, and they started adding layers. And suddenly you have more people whose job it was not to make games, but instead to manage their growth, protect their revenue, and keep their shareholders happy. That shift made these companies increasingly dependent on predictable success. Massive franchises essentially just became their safety net, and for a long time that ended up working for a lot of these companies because the industry was a lot smaller. There were a lot fewer games, and there really weren't a lot of games that were being made outside of the umbrella of AAA. EA had a lot of its sports games and its Battlefield and its Dragon Age. Activision had Call of Duty. Xbox had Halo, Gears, Fable. Ubisoft had Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and the Tom Clancy lineup. These were their pillars, but the bigger these companies got, the heavier they leaned on those pillars, and they made them fragile. Next thing you know, the reliance that they had wasn't just increasing their risk, it was slowly hollowing out the games that they kept making. What this has led to is a lot of these companies just continuing to make the exact same game, and when you keep pumping out the same thing in succession, optimizing it for revenue, these games just get filtered down until there's nothing left. It's the copy of a copy problem. Every iteration strips more out until you're just left with the shape and none of the substance. I don't know if any of you guys have seen this right now, but a lot of people are talking about Black Ops 2 maps and Black Ops 7, showing that they're the same layouts, the same name, and somehow all of the personality is gone. Everything looks washed out, sterile, corporate. People are putting up screenshots side by side saying Black Ops 7 on my $7,500 gaming PC versus Black Ops 2 on my $30 Xbox 360 from 2010, and these guys are right. It looks like garbage. It looks like an imitation of what they used to be, and this is what it looks like when value is stripped out of these games because the game itself just isn't the focus anymore. Activision now is probably the clearest example we have outside of Ubisoft. They didn't always look like this. Their games used to have a ton of personality. They used to be some of the most original in the entire industry. They used to have a huge back catalog, a broad catalog of games. They helped publish and market smaller games. They took big swings, but as the company grew, middle management ballooned, public investment became the priority, stability mattered way more than their range, and Call of Duty became the only anchor they had that was able to hold everything together. For a long time, Call of Duty was big enough to absorb failure. A game could miss, another one could underperform, and it really didn't matter that much. But when you're a publicly traded company, growth is never enough, and it's not an option to ignore. You are obligated to keep pushing it. So more money gets poured into the safest thing that they have on the board, risk gets avoided, other IP gets tossed aside, studios get repurposed, and before you know it, nearly every single team they have is funneling and feeding into the same franchise. That's how Activision ended up abandoning almost all of its IP in just a few years. It's how Blizzard slowly collapsed inward on itself, funneling nearly everything into World of Warcraft, Diablo, and Overwatch, and these aren't the only companies that are doing it. Nearly every single one of them have. What's happened is, over time, a lot of these companies have just narrowed themselves down to almost nothing. They've turned into these 1 or 2 game Andy operations, and once that happens, everything now revolves around squeezing more out of the exact same franchises. When you don't have anything else to fall back on, the pressure to grow your revenue isn't going to go away. It's just going to concentrate on those games. So instead of experimenting or refreshing your ideas, these guys have just been hyper-fixating on monetization, and they've been burning their goodwill by doing it. Not all at once, but piece by piece, as these players have started to feel like this relationship is turned more and more transactional. And once competition tightens and growth slows, the name alone isn't enough anymore. Relevance is going to start bleeding out, and suddenly they realize that they're not going to have an exit because they scrapped every other option they had years ago. I think that's a real problem. These companies have grown too big and too specialized. Audiences only know these guys for one thing, and now they're trapped by it. They can't make anything else because they don't know how to anymore. They can't take the risk to make anything new anymore, so they just keep doubling down on the same thing, not because it works, but because it's the only thing that these guys have left. And every time they do that, it just accelerates the decline even further. We've been watching this happen in real time with Ubisoft. Year after year, their catalog has shrank. Entire franchises have just been tossed aside, and everything's been funneled into Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and Rainbow Six. Anything outside of that has barely existed, barely gotten marketed, or it was just shoved into a live service gamble like X-Defiant, or it's a licensed project like Star Wars or Avatar, something just meant to keep the lights on. And as revenue kept sliding, they panicked and they just tunnel visioned even harder into Assassin's Creed, pouring $400 million trillion into it. I can't remember how much these guys spent on it. And then when Shadows failed, well, the floor dropped out underneath these guys, leaving them with the only option of selling off their major franchises to Tencent. Now, normally this is where players will say, okay, these guys just need to pivot, and no, most of these guys can't. They have trained themselves only to make a handful of games, and they've trained audiences to stop trusting them or to expect anything else. These franchises feel hollow, commercial, and interchangeable. Players feel burned because they actually are burned by a lot of these companies, and that's why the pivot's never going to come. The risk is way too high, and all their credibility is gone. I mean, pick any of these companies. Sure, you could hype a long-lost IP for a few weeks, but honestly, ask yourself, do you trust any of them to make anything that's actually worth your time or money anymore? Would people actually show up? Would that game actually represent what you want it to represent? Do these guys even know what people want anymore? I need you guys to appreciate how lethal this is for a multi-million dollar company with tens of thousands of employees that are relying on them, and their entire future hinges on one single game. What happens when Call of Duty is no longer relevant? What happens when Assassin's Creed is no longer moving units? That's what we're seeing right now. It's the floor that's giving out underneath these guys. That's why this industry is panicked right now. These are all expertly bad business decisions carried out by people that on a fundamental level do not understand their audience or the product that they're trying to push. And the problem is, even if these companies wanted to change, they can't. There's no way. The teams that they had that were making other games are gone. That culture is gone. That talent is gone. And when everything is built around feeding one machine at a massive scale, there's no option to just pivot back to being creative again. Not when you strip that muscle out. You know, I know this myself because I made this exact same mistake on a much smaller scale. Back when I first started the channel, I found success covering just 1 or 2 games, and that's all I ever focused on. And while I found some immediate success, that declined because the people were not watching videos for me, they were watching it for the game. So when those games lost relevance, my channel went alongside with it. I rebuilt the channel around who I actually am instead of what's happening in, near proximity to me or whatever's temporarily working at the moment. And that worked out for me, but that's the difference. I could rebuild. These guys can't. There's no option for them to be able to. They've trained their teams to only do one thing. And now they're stuck chasing relevance in an industry that's already moved away from them. And on top of that, What else are they going to do? They have no other options left. So, no, I don't really think that these companies are going to be able to come back from this. Not only have people moved on from them, but they've also trained audiences to not trust them. And on top of that, there's new competition that's in the market that's already building trust. It's building a reputation for themselves. It's gaining a lot of momentum, and they're not about to hand that back over. So, things are going to get rough. That's all I got to say. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys did enjoy the video, like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow me on Twitch, follow me on Twitter. I talk all week on Twitter, usually in like one-word sentences, something very catchy that gets a bunch of likes. I'm farming right now. Make me more popular. Subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends. Stay cool, stay righteous, stay safe. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.
Family, 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 family.